Okay, so gentlemen on the chat, just hop out and hop into the new episode that I have labelled Take 2. Thanks for your patience there on Facebook. See what they've got to say for themselves now. So anyway, Macca, you got a little win in the cup today.
Oh, I did actually. Yes, I had one bet for the day. I had a good night on the punt, or good day on the punt on Saturday. I picked up 200 on the gallops just on one bet, and then I had a good bet, good win on the trots for 200, and so I took a trifecta on the Melbourne Cup today, outlaid $84 and got back $2,226.30.
Wow, that's very good. My mate did try as well, but he only had it for 18% or something. So he got
Well, I do like. That's probably the one. I do bet, but I don't bet very much really. Only just 10, 20, and maybe 50 if I'm really confident. But I do like to have a bet on the Melbourne Cup because everything's right over the odds, and when you land, I've landed a few over the years, and you always get 2, 3, 4 grand or something like that with a bit of luck.
Yeah.
Because you don't get that often either. So
you guys continue talking. I'm just going to check the Spreaker app on my phone and just see if I can hear what's going on.
Okay. But, Pete, that was the story of my day today, so I was a very happy guy today.
Well, I went to a Melbourne Cup function back and had no such luck, and I had a 4 in the sweep, and it looked like Gold Coast draft hand, to be honest. And unfortunately, I had the close to the top weight there, one of the more favoured horses, but it was the one that went down. So,
yeah.
I wouldn't know the name of it.
Clifton Moor.
That's the one.
Yeah, Clifton Moor. Which is actually a place, Clifton Moor, which is just outside Galway. Beautiful cliffs and famous to look at in Ireland.
Well, unfortunately, didn't the Galway they didn't come home for me this time because it had a bit of a mishap. So anyway, but otherwise, terrific function today. Won no money, spent a bit, but it's okay. It's all part of Melbourne Cup Day, which was good fun.
It wasn't too good for the other one too, Clifton Moor, because he broke I think it's his shoulder, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he had to be destroyed. So,
no, really?
Yeah, he won about 1.7 mil. So he would have been worth probably on the market, probably worth at least 2 or 3 mil as a sire. So it's from the point of view for the poor horse, he lost his life, and from the point of view of the owners, they've not only lost their horse as an animal, but they've also lost a fair bit of dough in the process.
Well, that's interesting.
So, where's he saying that?
On the chat.
I don't know. I'll probably have to refresh it.
You're saying that you had a trifecta today, Macca?
Yeah, paid out.
Was it the cup?
Oh, the cup. Yep.
It's paid out, is it?
It's paid out. I've already withdrawn the money. $2,000.
Get away with it, I think. Jason's saying yay. Does that mean that people can hear us? Perfect now. Oh, no. Yep, perfect now. Sound is good. Okay. Fiend, if you're there, hop back on and let's get us into some news, because if Macca and I keep going, we'll lose listeners.
We seem to have lost him. Facebook and Speaker are all clear, so and new Bowman being charged. Jeez.
Yeah. Hang on. Okay. Here we go with the news. Shit. Righto, go on, Pete.
One of the really big stories to come out this week was that there was an unexplained technical glitch at a very popular podcast run by AFL CrowCast. It's currently under investigation. There's a tech crew involved, and they suspect Russian involvement, and so that is a breaking story. And we'll keep you posted on that one to see what happened. Other than that, it was a reasonably quiet week for the Crows. The AFL, as they do, very, very cleverly managed to draw the fixture out for, what was it, about 2 weeks, I think, was with some of the most cynical drip feeding I've ever seen. So it just about turned into a 23-round soap opera as to the games being sort of released here, there and everywhere. But to their credit, they managed to make that last for about 2 weeks. And lo and behold, that gets us right through to day one of pre-season training, which, as announced by Rowie and Bix, was apparently the start of the 29 AFL season. So classic AFL, making sure they're in the news every single day in the off-season. So quite incredible. But as it applies to us, as it applies to Crows, yes, we got cracking up at Cornerstone College at Mount Barker on Monday. The 1 to 4 year players turned up, and mostly, if we are to believe an interview with Tom Dudo, which is no reason we shouldn't, most of the players turned up in pretty good nick, and it was he mentioned in that interview that it was a real goal of the players to make sure they came back in the best possible condition this year, particularly after, I guess, some reports last year that some of the players weren't too good coming back. So, yes, apparently quite a successful return, and some of the names mentioned as being some of the leaders out there in terms of fitness, in particular, was Riley O'Brien. Got a big rap for the condition that he's currently in and the fitness that he's showing at the moment. And of course, was great to see 2 leaders out there in Rory Sloane and Bryce Gibbs going out there to meet up with the young players and show the way. Guys, did you see anything much of the footage that was released by the club?
Yeah, I certainly did, and I think you summed it up very well. It was very good to see that Sloane and Gibbsy out there showing leadership, but also that young Tom Dudo, who had the interview, spoke like a person who wants to be a leader in the future, and I think undoubtedly will be, given the way he plays and the way he talks. You know, most leaders are born, not made, and they either naturally got it, and I think he naturally does have it.
Fiend, did you see that interview with Tom Dudo?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Honestly, dig it out and have a look, because it was one of the, and I say this in all sincerity, it was one of the best player interviews I've seen in many a long year. Just in terms of the way that he was just so natural in front of the media, the way that there was no contrived answers. He was absolutely brilliant. It was a credit to him.
He's a pretty quality young lad, isn't he? I mean, there's no mistaking that.
Just laughing at a comment in the chat. Tyson Stengel caught a taxi.
Yeah, he was not in great shape.
No,
and I don't know. Is that just his natural? I don't know. I mean,
sorry, what's that all about?
Well,
there was some photos. Fiend and Stengel just did not look. He looked like he'd been on the Krispy Kremes, to be honest.
Oh, really?
But I wonder. Some of the reports I read that that we shouldn't be expecting a speed machine from Richmond. He's more of just a very, very clever, agile player that buys himself some space and time. But he's not and never has been a pacey player.
No, when you looked at the vision that they did show us, the players did look in good condition, bar Stengel and McAdam, who apparently prior to this year just gone by was a real pile-up and was knocking off about 20 of them a week. And you can tell he's hadn't been eating the pies, because he looked in tremendous shape, very, very lean. But I think, as I said, every pie that he passed up, Stengel's got hold of and eaten, I think, because he looked very roly-poly, I thought. And I remember him playing his couple of games for Richmond. And he certainly, I don't think, was quite as rounded or rotund as he looked in the vision that the club showed us anyhow. So, so when they want to know who stole the pies, we know who it was. It was Stengel.
Christ. Oh, well. I mean, he has been running around the VFL all year, I guess, so... But it's no real excuse for a professional footballer.
No, and look, what Pete said is right. He was never known for his being a real speedster, but he apparently is very difficult to tackle. And I always thought that was because he could take a good evasive action. I hope it's not because they can't get their arms around his waist. But, it's got to be a bit of work done there.
And what's happening with Hunter? Has he actually been re-rookied yet, or is that still up in the air?
Don't think so, but he was there. He turned up.
I'd be amazed if he wasn't.
No, we can't be re-rookied at this stage because he was on our rookie list for 2 years, which means that they automatically come off, and you can't do a third. What you can do is they go back into the draft and the rookie draft, and you can rookie them. And apparently, it would appear that we've promised to pick him up in the rookie list if he's around.
Yeah.
But Vardy Magic is saying that Dode said that Hunter was re-rookied. I think that's correct, that he said that. But I'm not sure that... I don't know how he could, because unless they've changed the rules so that you can have a third year with the consent of the player. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that rule either. It's very hard actually to find the definitive rules on the AFL website as well for some particular reason. But I knew that he was training on in the hope of being re-rookied. But the one that continues to bemuse me is the silent exit of Kyle Chaney. We haven't had any real comment from Kyle himself. There's been no real comment from the club. There's been a relatively strong response from Adelaide Crows supporters with regards to surprise. It's a funny one. It's a funny one.
They certainly put out comments that they were going to, depending upon how the draft plays out, that they were going to, that they hadn't ruled out relisting him. So, I have a funny feeling though that relationship's been damaged beyond repair, and I'm not sure that it has much to do with anything that happened on.
It seems that way. It seems that there was some issue that may play out in the courts, I reckon.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not in the know there. What are we talking about?
I remember we've spoken in the past that Kyle was reportedly at odds with the club because he didn't meet a trigger clause in his contract, and he put it down to mismanagement of his injuries by the club, and basically has said that had the club managed his injuries appropriately, that he would have played enough games to have triggered that clause. So there's been talk about legal action against the club by Kyle, but it's all been very behind closed doors. There's nothing being said publicly that I'm aware of. But the whole thing is just very... And when you then consider that he was also implicated in in that little storm in a teacup with the Talia boys a while back, maybe the relationship wasn't exactly 100% to start off with, and perhaps this is just the icing on the cake.
Yeah, because he apparently passed it on back to the dogs, didn't he?
Well, that was the story. Yeah, that he was the one that alerted them to the discussion between Daniel and Michael, which at the time was kind of inexplicable, really. So I don't know why he would have done that, but anyway, we move on, and it's. I have no doubt that Chaney will be picked up somewhere. There's too many clubs deficient in the medium-sized defender with a bit of ability to play small or tall. I wouldn't mind betting that it gets a fourth club.
Well, my take on it was I don't know whether it was related to any of that, and it may well have been. In my innocence, just looking at it on the surface, I thought it was just related to the fact that we have put ourselves in a position that we can use 8, 13, 16 and 21 if we are unable to make a trade to move up the draft list and get into a position like 3 or 4 or whatever. Whereas if we do manage to do it, we can always then redraft him up again, pick him up, re-pick him up again. So I just thought it was maybe to give ourselves an opportunity each way as far as the draft. I don't know.
Well, I think, I mean, it's quite possible, Macca, but I think they'll be more intent on keeping Hunter simply because of our ruck stocks. And to me, it appeared to be a decision between Kelly and Chaney, and without having any intel at all, it wouldn't surprise me if they shopped Kelly a bit because he's contracted, couldn't get a buyer or couldn't get a suitable buyer. And so because of the contract situation and because Kai was out of contract, he was the one that went.
Yeah, they certainly had a buyer for him. They just couldn't quite agree a price.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that'll be revisited next year.
Yeah. Would that be Collingwood, Pete, do you think?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's that'll be revisited next year. They couldn't quite work out a trade price and so terms, and so he'll play another year for us. But it was interesting. Speaking of Paul Hunter, that in that interview, Tom reserved a real special mention for Hunter and the fact that he absolutely expects him to take the next step this year. He was very, very, and he doesn't seem like the kind of character given to say things lightly or say things for the sake of it. He reserved a very special mention for Hunter, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes.
Well, I know that Nicky at times over the course of his time with the club has been pretty positive. I haven't seen a lot of him, and of course he was injured, for a bit of the last season. But Pete, what's your impression of him?
Oh, he's a good player. I don't think he had his best season last year. Just gone 2017, he played quite a bit of football when O'Brien was injured again, and he fares better when he can actually take first ruck and have that to himself. He's a very, very good tap ruckman, and he's very agile and very good around the ground. So he's a very versatile player, and I've seen enough of him to suggest that he is a good player. But whether that's going to be enough, and whether he's actually just quite big enough to make it in the AFL as a lead ruckman is going to be the query. I think you're right. I think that's a good query because I think that's the potential. But I think that it would not surprise me to see him overtake O'Brien, and I'd be very, very surprised if they got rid of him at this point.
Yeah,
I'd be certain that he'll be playing this year.
I mean, given the fact that we're of a mind that there might be some movement in the ruck stocks next year, it seems to me that, we may actually see a bit more of Riley O'Brien this year because I'm not confident that Source comes back strong. I just think he's as PJ says in the chat, his trajectory seems to be a set downward path. So given that, but to be left with only Riley O'Brien on the list who's a genuine ruckman would be extremely problematic if both of them went down, and Riley's had that problem with the shoulder, so I think it's imperative that they pick Hunter up again, and if they don't, I think they're going to have to go to the state leagues to pick up a stopgap just in case.
Yeah, well, you'd think they would in the rookie draft at least pick up perhaps the lad from Centrals or something like that.
I was about to mention him because apparently he got an invite to the Combine from one or two of the clubs, which you'd assume would be the South Australian-based club. So that could potentially be an option for them.
Yeah, they're going to have another one. You can't go into a season with two ruckmen.
No, but just coming back to Jacobs again, there's no doubt that he played the majority of the season with a crook back, and I don't defy any player with a crook back to perform well at AFL level. And it is possible that if his back fully recovers, although backs don't generally recover too well, if his back does recover, that he may improve on his performances last year. But the performances we were getting out of Source towards the end of last year weren't AFL standard, in my opinion. And well, if that's what if he serves up again next year, we'd certainly have to look at putting trying the young lads in there in his place, because some of his games were lamentable, really, towards the end.
Well, I think Justin Reid was pretty clear that O'Brien would have got, had he not been injured for a significant portion of last year, he would have played. I think Reid was pretty clear about that when he made some comments prior to the trade period.
Yeah, but there was never really any indication. I mean, I think talk's a bit cheap at times at post-season when you're trying to encourage blokes to stay or encourage them to keep pushing for a spot. I think Riley was on the emergency list a few times, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, we'll wait and see. But I think they need to go in with a third ruckman in the squad. And if it's not Hunter, like I said, I think it needs to be someone from the SANFL or a state league somewhere.
The other point I was going to make about that, though, is that I think the centre bouncers are going to be critical next year with the 6-6-6 situation and not being able to have a loose man back in defence at the start. So you're going to have 6 forwards, 6 defenders, and they have to got their various almost their zones that they have to be in. You've got a situation that if you can win the ball out in the middle, and this is where the ruckman becomes so important, and as are the midfielders, obviously. But if you can win the ball out of the middle and get it into your forward line very quickly, you don't have that loose man in defence floating across, etc. So it brings it back into a one-on-one situation, and I think that teams that win the middle of the ground are going to go very, very well. That's what I think.
Mm. I couldn't agree more, Macca.
Couldn't agree more, Macca. I think you're spot on.
Have a drink.
No, I think you're right. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that whole rule plays out. And I think you're right. Winning the ruck is going to be possibly a little bit more important this year because there's just going to be less blokes around the ball.
Yep.
Just on the 1 to 4 year players, would have thought that barring injury, we look reasonably experienced and settled. I just wonder, for discussion, any players that you think might sort of, in that sort of 1, 2, 3 sort of bracket might bob up and snatch a spot through the pre-season? Anyone that you can see bobbing up that might surprise?
Mate, you go.
Well, the obvious. You count the ones that played last year, Pete, or you can talk about like ones that haven't played before?
Oh yeah, if they've had a game, that's fine. I just really anyone in the. I mean, some of those players that came back on Monday, guys like Miller and those kind of guys. Well, we know that they've got spots in the side, but I'm talking about guys that you would put as regulars that may be able to snatch a spot.
Well, Gallucci, obviously, towards the end of last year, his graph was going up very, very nicely indeed, and the way he was doing it was just getting better and better each week, and his belief in himself as an AFL footballer was growing, and also us on the other side of the boundary, we were loving what we were starting to see out of the guy, and I think he's going to end up being a very, very good AFL player because he's got a hell of a lot of talent. He's got pace, he's got acceleration. He's not frightened to get in there. He's a beautiful kicker of the ball. I think he certainly will be one that I think will be become one of our very important players this year, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. I couldn't agree more, Macca. The one that's got me interested for next year is Darcy Fogarty.
Yes. Good one to pick it. Good one to bring up.
I think with Mitch going and with Tex, a question mark over Tex in terms of his ongoing fitness, And I think, Fogg's had a bit more time in the system now. He's had a taste for it, obviously, last year, and he showed glimpses. He just couldn't get in amongst it often enough to be really effective. But I wouldn't mind betting that they use him a little bit more as the season wears on. I think there's a place for him now in the forward line. Yes, we've got Shane McAdam coming in, but let's face it, Shane's got some work to do to get up to the standard, I'd imagine. And I reckon Darcy might have a bit of a let's not call it a breakout year because he's still young, but I think he will be more influential this season than last.
Yeah, a season where he goes through the process of gradually cementing a position in the side. Where at the moment he was sort of in and out and in and out.
Well, the problem he had was that he was in there replacing injured players, and so he was actually a focus, which is not ideal for a first-year key forward. So really what you're hoping is that, as you say, Finn, he takes the McGovern spot and just becomes that sort of fourth forward who can actually just build himself into a season.
That's right. You're spot on, Pete. The fact that he had to cover for Tex with McGovern injured as well, there was just it was too much focus, and I think opposition clubs worked out quite quickly that if you let him off the chain, he actually got a bit of ability. So you actually have to, despite the fact that he's just a kid, he could actually hurt you a little bit with a couple of grabs. So, and with a lovely long kick as well. So, playing that fourth forward and maybe able to get up the ground a bit, or they might use Tex a bit higher or whatever, it just gives us more flexibility. But I think it also gives Darcy a bit more opportunity under slightly less pressure to develop. And our forward line in general is going to be very interesting to see how they structure, because obviously we've got young Himmelberg who might also push for a spot at times. And we were talking about the ruck earlier. We've still got this option of pushing JJ into the ruck and bringing Elliot into a forward second ruck role. So I guess all is not lost there. But it's going to be interesting to see how they play Fogarty. If they want him to play deep, or I would suspect that they probably want to play him high.
The other thing about Darcy is that you can. If you were playing at a pinch, you can put him back, because he went back a couple of times, even just in the year just gone, and I thought he didn't look out of place when he was playing loose in defence back there either. So he's a kid he's going to make a football. There's no doubt about it, and it's a question of just really the pace at which he established himself.
Yeah. Another player that came back on Monday that I really wanted to have a chat about, who fast became a favourite of mine when I saw him last year, was Lachlan Murphy, and just how we see him and how he fits into the side, if he does. I thought he didn't let us down at any point when he got opportunities last year. He's only 19 years old last year.
I know. You got to remind yourself of that, don't you?
You really do. He's a very, so he'll only be 20. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about him, and whether you see him, given the fact that we've gone for recruitment of small forwards, he would feel the heat. He'll be thinking to himself, he's really got a fight on his hands to get a spot. So just wondering what your thoughts are.
It was an interesting situation. It actually surprised me a little bit that they wanted to bring another small forward in Stengel, because I felt that Lachlan Murphy showed enough that he could fill that role. He's obviously not as dynamic, I guess, as Eddie. He's a different player, but he gets a lot of the pill, and he's very hard over it, and he knows where the goals are. So, I don't know. Maybe they've got the fact that he's only 176, so he'd struggle to play through in any sort of midfield rotation, I think. But I like him as a player, and as I said earlier, he plays with a maturity above a 19-year-old kid, in my opinion.
No argument about it. The mystery guy to me is, and I don't know what's going to happen with him ever type situation, for Holke. I don't think he embarrassed himself when he played last year, but does he have the appropriate tricks to become an AFL regular?
Well, Finn, I'll let you go with that one.
Yeah, my view is I like his good qualities. He's very hard over the ball. He's a good mark for his size. I query his pace. And without that pace, he turns into a poor man's Matt Crouch, in my opinion, in terms of being a midfielder. And up forward, I think there are other players ahead of him, and I don't see that he actually fits into our structure long term as a forward. He could probably pinch hit or cover injury or whatnot, but we recruited him as an inside-outside midfielder. And at this stage, what worries me is his lack of agility and lack of pace. He's like a shorter guy that plays tall, if you know what I mean, and I don't know where he fits in our team. He's 186, so he's got reasonable height about him, but we've got other blokes ahead of him.
Yeah, he is an interesting one because he certainly doesn't lack courage, and he's quite physical. He has got strong hands, but I do think his Achilles heel is going to be that lack of pace. We brought in McAdam. Eventually, I think will one day play AFL footy, whether it be this year or next year or later on in the year. And one of his assets and attributes is he's going to be his pace and his agility. And, again, he's going to be another competitor to Paholke as well, apart from the ones that are already there. You mentioned Lachlan Murphy. There's the little pie eater in Stengel. He'll be trying for a spot as well. So I just always, when I look down back, and I think, is there any spot for him down back? Well, yeah, with Smith coming back in again, we're loaded down back with spares as well. So I just don't see where he's going to go.
I think we mentioned last week when we spoke briefly about Miles is that perhaps there's a defensive role for him. In a small defensive role, if they wanted to release Luke Brown at all, I could see him playing that kind of a role. But I don't see him breaking into our midfield as it stands, and that's ultimately what he was recruited for. So on that basis, I think he's under the pump.
Yeah, I think he is a little bit.
The next two players, I think, to have a quick look at our two leading goal kickers from the Sandful last year, and that was the Big Berg and also Ben Davis. Just interested on your thoughts, those two. Obviously, talented kids, and we saw what Elliott could do in that game against Carlton. But I still think that it may still be a year too early for him. And Ben Davis is the other one who would now seem to me to be in a contest with McAdam. Very similar type players, apart from the fact that McAdam has a bit more pace.
Well, that's a very good point. I think, the Berg, well, I really think he's going to be a very, very talented footballer for us in the long run. But again, it's where do you find the spot for him, because of the fact that if you say JJ's got one spot up forward and the skipper's got the other one at centre forward, well, and you've got heaps of Fogarty, etc., all vying for the other pocket from Eddie, it's just where do you put him? But I think Himmelberg ultimately, he's a very talented footballer. I thought he showed, although he's green as grass in that one game that he did play, there were a lot of things to like about him. He hunts the ball like a maniac, and he's not finished once the ball. He competes in the air, but once the ball hits the ground, he's after it again like a ferret after a rabbit. I mean, he really does give 100%. So I do like the guy.
Well, he's a bona fide key forward, and at the moment we're going with Tex and Jenkins as our key forwards, and so really the only spot that's available to him is either Tex's spot or JJ's spot. Now, Josh had probably his best season for the club last season, in my opinion, in terms of the style of footy that we want him to play.
Yep, agree.
So I don't think he's going anywhere, Josh, in terms of out of the team unless his form falls away. Tex is an interesting one because there's ongoing question marks about his fitness. But if you have Himmelberg and Darcy Fogarty in the same forward line, it becomes a very, very young forward line very quickly. So I don't know. What worries me is that, as you rightly point out, Pete, I still think he's at least half a season away. What worries me is that he'll be starting to hit his straps at the time when his contract becomes due, and there may be the urge to play with his brother, and we might actually lose him altogether, which would be a damn shame because we've put a lot of development time into him, and he's clearly a quality player in the making.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, look, we talked about this the other week when people were talking about, drafting one of either Ben or Max King, and, you put 3 or 4 years development to big guys like that, and they're only 3 years away from free agency. So I agree that his time for me is 2020, and that will be, his contract will be up at the end of 2020. So if he has a breakout year in 2020, a kid like that is going to have some massive offers coming in. So that's going to be, tricky for the police management to manage that. But he's certainly a big talent. There was some discussion on chat before about the upside of Ben Davis. He's just a really, really special player in terms of his X factor, and he's got huge upside, that lad. But it'll be whether he can put it all together, and where you fit a kid like that in. He's battling, I think, with Fogarty, McAdam, and also Davis for that fourth forward role. Really, Ben I don't know if you've seen him play much, but he plays very tall. I think he's about 180, maybe 186, 188. But he plays. Yeah, is that about right?
Yeah. He's pretty tall. He looks about, the old name is about 6'2" or something like that.
He's 187.
187. So he plays very tall. He's a very, very strong overhead mark. So it would be interesting to see whether he can, and I mean, he's had a full season of SANFL last year. He was our second highest goal kicker. So, he's no mug, and it'll be interesting to see, a kid like that who's had a season like last year, you really look at him saying, well, now's the time. Are you going to put your hand up and put yourself forward and really make a charge at getting a spot and beat Fogarty for that spot?
It's a big ask. It's a big ask, Pete.
Yeah, of course it is. It absolutely is. But, this will be his third year on the list, I think. He had his first year he was significantly injured. Really, we got nothing out of him at all. But last year he had a full season in the SANFL. He's not a big guy. And, as I say, he was our second leading goal kicker. So, he had a good season. And so really, are we saying that he needs to 2020? Or is he not going to be good enough? I don't know.
Well, I mean,
these are the questions.
He went from being featured by the club mid-season, and it looked like he was going to get a debut, to being sort of talked about as on the cusp of being delisted by some in the space of half a season, and for no particular reason, really, because I don't think it's form tapered at all. But again, Peter, I guess it's one of those things, and when you actually look at our list, we do have a lot of depth in those mid-forward type players.
Yeah, we do.
A lot of depth and a lot of good young talent. So whether they try to develop him in a different way, like as a running half back, or whether I don't know. But I guess a bit will depend on whether they see Darcy as a long-term forward, or whether they try to develop him into more of a midfield role, as been spoken about by some. I don't know, but I reckon Ben Davis has got it all to play for this year. There is that spot left open by McGovern. You would say that Fogarty's the incumbent, but if Darcy starts off quietly, you would think that Ben Davis is next cab off the rank for that spot.
I tell you what, though, you'd hate to be a Paholke or a Davis or one of those, because they'd be sitting there trying on the edge there, trying to get into the side, knowing that after the draft there's got to be 4 new buggers coming in there to contest it with it as well. So in terms of the depth that we do have, and in terms of the competition that's going to happen for these players that already are marginal players, it's just only going to get worse, isn't it?
And it might boil down to also guys who gets a reasonable spot in the JLT, who gets a run and who can actually put their hand up in those trial games.
Yeah, it's all about that. All about the AFLX, Pete.
So it'd be interesting to see who gets what opportunity and whether they can actually, I'm sure they'll trial a few of those guys in that role, in that McGovern role, and then of course there's injuries as well. So I mean, we're obviously talking about a fully fit list, and it will depend upon injuries as well. But he's just one that I'll certainly have an eye on, because if you see some of the marks that he takes in the SANFL, he will, if he does get a go, he will take Mark of the Year. You can get that. You can write that down, because he can be a very spectacular player.
And the other big recruit we're going to have for the year, of course, is Smith for the whole year. So, barring any injuries, and he's just such a talent that he immediately makes our side look better with him in the side, with his the amount of ground that he gains, and you'd have that. That's just a plus, really, because we never had anybody that could make up the distance that he does.
Well, the one positive out of last season is that it's left us with essentially only 5 players, or 4 players. Let me see. Andrew McPherson, Ben Davis, Paddy Wilson had 1 game, Paul Hunter hasn't had a game, and Elliott had 1 game. So there's only 3 players on our list currently that haven't played an AFL game of football. So when you talk about depth, I don't think the club has been as strong in the depth department ever. Obviously they're going to add a few kids to that list again, but every line has good experience, and it has players that could quite easily take over a role. The only spot that worries me, and I'm going to be very interested to see how they treat this spot, is the 2 key defensive posts next season. Hardigan got injured at times. Tales at times looked a bit, a bit dodgy in terms of his fitness. Alex Keith had an up and down season with injury and form. I don't know whether what they do, but we've kept Andy Otten as a stopgap. But I think we are probably vulnerable in the tall defensive stakes, and it'll be interesting to see if they push Alex Keith forward to begin with in place of Kyle Hardigan.
Yeah, and just in the chat that I saw the name McPherson get mentioned. Does anybody, either in the chat or in the conversation that we're having now, any idea where he's at in terms of
He's still battling groins.
Yeah. He's due back in 2024.
Yeah, I don't hold. Unfortunately, he's got a lot of talent, McPherson, but his grinds have been terrible. So whether Steve Saunders can sort him out, as appears to have been the case, just as an aside with Brad Crouch. Apparently, Brad Crouch is running on top of the ground and looking really good. Touch wood, everybody. But McPherson hasn't trained or didn't front training for the 1 to 4 year players.
Interesting, the key defensive spot, because as Macca said earlier, Fogarty played there in the SANFL games towards the end of last year, so I guess that's a possible option to send him back. And as you say, we've got a bit of depth in that 4th forward role, so that could open up a spot if they decide to go that way.
It's 193, so I guess he's just tall enough, but you'd almost wonder whether they want to remodel Elliot Himmelberg as a centre-half back option. I don't know.
Yeah, just on Burton.
Well, that's where he did play his junior football there.
Himmelberg.
Burton's not responsible for the injury management now, is he?
Well, he's responsible for the whole department.
Oh, he takes responsibility for nothing. I mean, seriously.
No. Let's not turn this into a Burton rant. You asked a question.
I love
Himmelberg, he played his whole under-18 season at centre-half back. So we've developed him into a forward ruck.
Yeah. So I guess there's a possibility there, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'd hope Tales comes back fit, but he had a few hip problems, I think, Daniel, and a couple of other little niggles. A knee, I think, or an elbow. I can't remember. But he certainly had a hip problem. And Keith and Hardigan was sort of mix and match in terms of their injury problems. Hardo with a couple of hamstrings, and I think Keith had hamstrings too, didn't he, from memory?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, he did.
But he's going to go through the whole list.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, just about the whole list.
Yeah.
But no, I like Keith as a player because he's not a panicker. He's a very calm player. I thought that Keith actually was. I thought a little bit sounder, and a little bit more reliable than Hardigan. Hardigan's got pace and dash. That's one thing I've got him.
But he's also got strength, Macca. He does very well against big forwards. I think the problem with Hardigan is that he makes a few snafus by foot, a couple of poor decisions, and he gets roasted because he's not what you call a fashionable footballer, and his skill range is kind of limited. But he's very valuable against monster forwards because he's a big fella.
My only knock on him, and at times when he's got to think, that's when he makes his biggest boo-boos. When he plays instinctively, he goes well. But the minute he's got tons of time and thinks, I'll cross that and go to the centre of the ground, bang, and he's going to hit the opposition right on the chest.
You know what, Macca? I know that every player has to play a role and be versatile, etc. But I think, he's a big, tall, key defender, and I think it's a responsibility of players around him to make sure that he doesn't get exposed in those situations.
That's fair enough.
Blokes running past for a handball or making position for the short kick so he can dish off. If the ball's in Kyle Hardigan's hands and we're expecting him to direct traffic aggressively, I think we've got the ball in the wrong person's hands. That's not what he's in the team for.
Well, 100% agree with that. Because, as I said, when he plays instinctively, he does very, very well. And it's only when he gets into that thought process that when he makes boo-boos. But I do like Keith, though, because I do think he's a calm footballer and not a panicker. And I thought he did very, very well.
And speaking of the 1-4 players, we've got, don't forget, Tom Duday, who we started out talking about as a really, really solid third tall defender down there as well. He can come across and kill contests and intercept. So he worth his weight in gold, that lad.
Oh, yeah. A standout, possible future captain of the club. I hate putting those labels on people. As you said, Pete, I haven't heard the last interview, but I've heard him speak prior, and he's a quality individual. Great player, solid, hopefully a 250-game player for the Adelaide Crows.
Made no bones about the fact that he was looking to improve his leadership skills and that was something that he'd be seeking in the future. So he was quite open about that.
I did actually see that quote, that he enjoyed the fact that Rory and Gibbs were out because it allowed him opportunity to develop his own skills.
Just that, I noticed in the chat a little bit earlier, they were mentioning and they'd like us to chat a little bit about the fixtures. So
we'll get there, Macca. We'll get there, but there's only one bloke running the show here, mate, and that's not you.
Well, not that you would make that known.
Have we got? Well, the thing is, because I've got to press the buttons. Have we got any more to talk about on the list before we do get onto the fixture? No. All right.
Because I've talked about all the players I want to talk about. Yeah,
what I did want to do just before we moved onto the fixture, Macca, and you ruined the whole thing. Was just mention the Sherry's Farm down at Mount Compass again. Obviously, they're having an open day open weekend this weekend for the start of the strawberry season. 11 till 3 both days. The weather looks like it's going to be decent, not too hot. It's great down there, and I think the local community getting around the farm as well. And putting on a few things, bouncy castles and all that sort of stuff. So a great family weekend. And, of course, not only the weekend but all throughout the summer they'll be there with not only strawberries but tons of other stuff too, some really good local produce and some nice things to taste and try and buy as well. So we really appreciate Adam and his family sponsoring us throughout the month, and we'd love to hear reports of as many CrowCast listeners as possible getting down on the weekend. Fixture, Macca.
Well, that's basically what we individually and collectively think of the fixtures. I think we've been very well treated in terms of who we're playing against. And in fact, the one thing I do like about our fixture is that in our home games, we're playing, and I know there's been big complaints about not playing at the MCG by some people, and that's a valid point. But the compensating side of that is that the sides that play at the MCG, and there's Collingwood, there's Hawthorn, Melbourne, etc. These are very, very good sides, and to play them on our home ground is, I think, a huge advantage. I know it's a crowd puller, but I'm not worrying about crowds at the moment. I'm worrying about the ability to get into the 8 and get into the finals and hopefully win a flag. And I think to play them that way at home is the best way to play them, because it gives us the greatest opportunity of beating them. And then on top of that, it's when you look at the 5 games over and above the 17 teams that you play once, well, I think we've been very, very well treated in that situation as well. So I think that we've got a very good draw, and if we can keep our side sound like we did in 17, if we can keep our side together and get our game going, I think that we really, really should be finishing around somewhere in the position. Well, PJ said we should have to finish in the top 6. I think even further than that, I think it gives us every chance to finish top 4.
Well, Champion Data, pardon me, Champion Data rated our draw the second easiest in the comp. And despite one or two quirks, you'd probably have to go along with that. The only real complaint is the 1 5-day break that we've got heading into Richmond, which isn't ideal, and just our luck that we'd have our 5-day break, into a power club. But aside from that, I like the mix of days. I like the Thursday night fixtures. I think they're good. I think we get enough exposure on Thursday and Friday night. And the only other thing that I can't work out why they can't give each club that isn't a tenant at least 2 games at the MCG. I don't understand how they can't work that into the fixture.
Well, they obviously could if they wanted to, because I think you're 100% right. But I don't think for one moment they give a rat's toss bag about interstate side and whether they get their exposure at the MCG, and I don't think it even crosses their mind.
I'm actually pretty happy with the fixture. I'll go on record as saying I think it's pretty good. So I agree with you both, gents. I think it's a handy draw for us that we should be able to take advantage of. One of the things I thought might just be worth raising was an idea that was floated that caused quite a bit of controversy through the week, and that was the idea of potentially playing a showdown on the MCG. It was put out by Damien Barrett as a potential. So what are our thoughts on that, everybody?
Give it up.
Oh, that's insanity.
It's the biggest load of shit I've ever heard in my life.
Why would he suggest that? I mean, seriously.
His argument was that the crowd, right? He reckons that there'd be 60 or 70 at the G or wherever if it was played in Victoria. Well, he, of all people, would know that the big thing with the showdowns outside of South Australia is the TV audience. And the AFL actually get far more value out of a TV audience in Victoria and other states outside of South Australia than they would an extra 10 or 15,000 at the G. So why would you take away a showcase game that would be a home game for both clubs in this state? Why would you want to? I mean, he's obviously struggling for copy if he's putting up that bullshit.
Well, is it some condescending way he's thinking of only having to give up one game at MCG to get the 2 bites of the cherry. In other words, each team getting a game, but only taking up one valuable Victorian MCG game.
Well, someone's got to put their neck out on the chopping block, and I didn't think it was too bad an idea. I thought it had some merit just from the point of view that if it was properly scheduled, and I think that the example that I put out was, look, if you scheduled this on a bye, on a bye weekend where you had few or no games in Melbourne for that particular weekend, so that it was a real genuine standalone Melbourne fixture. I guess it would be curious, more than anything else, it would be curious to see just how the Showdown brand is accepted. Everything that we hear is that they're very, very popular, and I just wonder what sort of crowd they would get. And I absolutely preface what I'm about to say with the if a Showdown was pulling a really decent crowd in Melbourne, if it was a standalone game, then I guess the way that I looked at that is that would be a unique opportunity for both Adelaide and Port to play an extra game on the MCG in front of a decent crowd that would go some way to helping, given the fact what happened to us in 2017, to preparing them a little bit better for finals on the MCG. Now, if you think about, for instance, next year we're going to play against Carlton at the MCG. That does not in any way, shape or form replicate what it was like to go to the MCG for a final and for what hit us in 2017. And bearing in mind a lot of the reports where the players were really shell-shocked because they hadn't played in front of 100,000 people before. Now, I'm not suggesting you're going to get that kind of crowd, of course, but if it built to some kind of substantial crowd, the question that I put out there is there a benefit to the players to go through a game like that? And is the Showdown brand enough to draw a crowd in Melbourne in the same way that, State of Origin Rugby League draws a crowd in Melbourne? I don't know.
Pete,
I think these kind of things you can put out there as for debate.
Pete, the
go on, chop my head off.
No, I don't want to. You raised some really good points, but as a couple of counterpoints, I don't think a crowd consisting of maybe 35,000 Crows and Port supporters and maybe 20,000 neutrals is going to replicate 100,000 against Richmond. Like, it's not. You wouldn't have the same crowd dynamic. I actually think that there'd be no value at all in terms of trying to replicate a finals type of atmosphere in playing Port Adelaide, because you probably at most, in my opinion, you get 40,000 people that were either Crows or Port supporters, and the remaining 20 would be impartials.
And interesting.
So that's a third of the crowd that would be impartial.
What I was going to say there, Fiend, was that, and whose home game is it? I mean, we play 2 Showdowns a year, and I suppose you could have it. If it's just let's just assume it happened, you'd have to have this year. One side has a home a home Showdown, and the other one's played at the MCG, and then alternate that the next year. But if that was going to be a permanent fixture type situation, but also I can see from a crowd point of view that would also become very variable, because if it was a Crows Showdown, a home Showdown, I could see a lot of Crows supporters going over there, and very few Port supporters. And even when if it was a Port one, nominally, I could see a situation where there'd still be a lot of Crow supporters go over there, and there'd be more Port supporters for that. So I think you'd get different crowds depending what connotation was put on it, whose home game it was.
Yeah. Aside from the obvious financial disadvantage, because obviously part of the whole financial model for the Adelaide Oval and the SMA is the bumper crowds we get for the Showdowns every year, I actually think there's a far easier way to allow interstate or non-Victorian clubs to prepare for finals on the MCG, and that's to actually schedule games against Victorian clubs at the MCG. That seems to me to be a much easier way to do it.
Oh, absolutely. But will they do it? That's the question. They haven't done it in the past.
Well,
when was the last time we played a big?
Oh no, I agree. I agree, Pete. And I was being sarcastic because why would there be a motivation apart from a financial one to bring a showdown to Victoria when the far simpler solution is to schedule Crows v Collingwood? You know, they clearly don't have the motivation to provide an equal footing for all clubs in terms of exposure to the MCG. So the Victorians' only motivation would be financial. That's all it would be, and to me, there's not enough. Notwithstanding the fact I don't think that was actually a serious proposal. I think it was just a bit of clickbait.
Oh no, it was just put out there for debate. That's all.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting, but nothing to die in a ditch over. And,
you could argue that Victorian clubs might want more games over here to get used to playing against rabbit crowds in South Australia on a narrow ground. I don't know. I think that the fixture itself is not really a fixture. Well, it's a fixture. It's not a draw, and it's designed just to maximise exposure.
Indeed.
Well, definitely a fixture, yeah. But and the objective of it always is, as you said, is exposure and bums on seats and maximising television. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Does anyone also have a problem with the last round being at the bloody Ballarat ground?
I have a major problem with it. I think it's... I cannot understand for the life of me why, when you come to round 23, Port Adelaide, I think, went there last year, and disgraceful weather and et cetera, but good to see their crowds get wet. But why would it not be a Victorian team that goes to Ballarat if they want to expose AFL football to the Ballarat and
I disagree with that a bit, Macca, because the Crows do have a good following in regional Victoria, and Ballarat was the halfway house, back in the day when we were making finals. So there's a bit of love for Adelaide in Ballarat. I don't have a problem in playing there because you can't play in Adelaide the last round every season. What I do have is playing the last round there.
Well, the other thing too is that the doggies apparently they play one game there a year, and the idea is they're trying to get Ballarat to become dog supporters, and so therefore, and as you say, there is a little bit of a maybe affection, but something like that towards Adelaide for having travelled and stayed there over the years on the way to finals.
What is it saying about some of our supporters that drop into Ballarat on the way to games that we end up with Crow supporters springing up in Ballarat? They obviously make the overnight stay in Ballarat before they go to the footy on the Saturday. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, there's a lot of news in them. And but the point I'm trying to make is that why not a Victorian team? I mean, it's just an absolute waste of money for a start to fly a whole team and crew over there when they could drive their bloody cars to Ballarat.
Look, I have to say that if this had been in the age where there was no bye before finals, then I think I would be jumping up and down. But when there's a bye before finals anyway, I think really does it matter where you play last round?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's. I mean, they've brought the ground up to AFL standards supposedly, but there were problems last year with it. I don't know. I think it's unnecessary. I think it's unnecessary to play a game at a regional ground in the final round of the season. You play in the capital cities. If any round should be vanilla in terms of venues, it should be round 23. That's my point of view. I mean, I get
what you're saying about the surface and all the rest. I get that.
And also the travel. I mean, how do we get there? Do we fly to Melbourne and then fly to Ballarat? Is there a direct flight to Ballarat? Do we hop in the car and, take mum and dad to Ballarat? It's problematic. It's not a case of playing at the G or Etihad and or Marvel or whatever it is now, and flying in, playing a game, pissing off. There's extra logistics involved, and I just feel that it's not a big deal, but it just stuck out a bit like a sore thumb as being unnecessary in round 23.
Yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, but aside from that, I mean, there's always negatives in the draft, but I think we've done well. I like the fact that we've got good clubs playing in Adelaide this season. I think we'll have a massive year in terms of attendances again.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good part of it.
I like the spread across the days or the nights. So overall, I think it's probably 90% right.
Yeah, it's a tick. It's a tick for me.
Definitely a tick. The one game that, of course, is be interesting is whether we can make some sort of amends when we play Melbourne up in Darwin, up in Donkey Town. We were embarrassed in Alice Springs, up in the NT, and I'm just hoping that when we go up to Darwin, we remember that we're playing AFL footy and do a much better performance than we did last time.
Well, I think that you could say that about the whole bloody season, Macca, to be honest. We were embarrassed for much of the whole season, particularly the first half. And,
there were times, no doubt about that.
Sort of bringing around...
Nothing will rival our performance against Fremantle. I stand by that. That was the worst performance I've seen from the Crows, possibly since inception. But anyway, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, I think just to elaborate on that point, Pete, what you're really saying is that's the worst side we've ever been beaten by.
Yeah, the Melbourne game was hard. It was difficult to watch, and the Hawthorn game afterwards was difficult to watch as well, or before the game after, I can't remember. That little period was just excruciating, and the Fremantle loss was just ridiculous, and ultimately cost us a spot in the finals. So there's a lot I think there's a lot to atone for this year, and it's bringing the conversation around full circle. It's good to see the lads come back the earliest they've come back since 2014. They're all, by all reports, they're communicating amongst themselves and very committed to having an excellent pre-season. Let's keep our fingers crossed that the fitness staff can learn from their errors last season and get the players through unscathed through a long pre-season, and that we can hit the ground running in round one.
Here.
And one point to raise, and not trying to be contentious, is that Adelaide were having a review, and it was, and they decided to have an internal review. Has that been completed, and has there ever been any comment made on that?
Very quiet, Macca.
Very quiet.
Yeah, there's
Very
been
quiet.
references made to internal reviews in some of the comments. I think Rob Chapman made a reference to an internal review the other day, but there's certainly been no findings published that I'm aware of.
Is that the way to handle it?
You could. That's a hornet's nest, Macca. I mean, and we talked about it ad nauseum. I would say not. Definitely, I think the way to handle it is the way other clubs have handled it with external reviews. I mean, Richmond probably the benchmark in the way that they used Deloitte. Is it Deloitte's? I think.
Yes, or KPMG or something.
Something like that. So we're just not even in the ballpark in that regard.
I just find it a little bit strange that it's almost like it's disappeared off the map, and I don't know, maybe it's best it does because they get told a heap of crap anyhow. So,
but it's consistent, Macca. It's consistent with how the club has handled the whole situation of 2018. There's been, there's been no inclination by the club to be open to any degree throughout the last 12 months. And I think the truest thing that I've heard come from the Crows in the last 12 months is their consistent line of, we've put it to bed, we want to put it behind us. I think that's how they feel about 2018 in general. They've put it to bed, they want to move forward, and we won't be hearing jack out of it.
No.
And maybe that is the best way. I don't know.
Well, I think what happens is if we have another shit year again next year, then I don't think they'll be able to avoid public scrutiny, and I think that the approach might be different. But I think they see it as an aberration. They have made some key changes. Bringing Saunders in, I think, is an excellent move. I was surprised. I was very surprised and very impressed that they were able to get Steve Saunders onto the team, not only because of his own expertise in his field, but also the connection with Kangatech, and it was kind of a tip of the hat to the fact that they'd stuffed up that implementation. So I think they've made some key moves in the off season. It remains to be seen how they go, but I think that's the way they've dealt with it. Just actions speak louder than words. But if they have another stuff up this season, then the public knives will be out and they won't be able to avoid it.
Well, that's really what I was getting about before about Burton. When I wasn't going to have my usual bash of him. I was going. Is Saunders taking charge of the physical activity side of it exclusively? That's what I was really getting at.
Well, I believe he's a consultant, Macca. So we've still got Matt Haas as our strength and conditioning manager. We've still got Brett Burton overseeing football operations. Steve Saunders, I imagine, would sit alongside Matt Haas, and I think his role would be to manage the ongoing implementation and use of Kangatech, and to specifically work with some key players like Brad Crouch and Andy McPherson, to name a couple, and maybe Cole Hardigan and one or two others, maybe Tex as well for that matter, to try and get them right.
Okay. It's a curiosity on my part.
Yeah, his official role isn't general manager of anything; it's consultant.
Okay, but obviously he's going to be very heavily involved.
Well, I mean, what do you want me to do? I have no idea, but he's the guy that developed Kangatech, so he's clearly there to clean that mess up, and he's also.
But Burton's the head of football, so everyone's under him.
Yeah.
I think Pike's even under him. So he's the head of football.
I'd imagine. Yeah.
Pike is underneath him.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean Burton's the head of football operations, so with a background in health, so I think he had some role in the strength and conditioning. But Matt Haas is the general manager of strength and conditioning.
Okay.
It's on the Crow's website, mate.
Yes. No, I'm not. I'm keeping quiet so I don't say anything out of place.
Well, no, it's not that. It's just, it's just that I'm not quite sure what you're getting at.
What I was getting at is that without Saunders there last year, between Burton and Haas, they made a right stuff up of it, and I think nobody could say anything different to that. And I was wondering whether Saunders was there to make sure that stuff up didn't reoccur.
Well, no, because he's under Burton.
I understand that.
So you can't manage upwards.
Well,
anyway, chaps.
I think let's abandon.
We got to. I think maybe move on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably time to move on to sweets and smacks. Macca, what do you reckon?
Yep.
I'm ready.
Oh, yes, I am a grumpy old man. That's what I am. And I really don't care who knows it. I don't vote politicians are a joke.
Well, I have a few sweets this week, and we had the first training session, and I think a couple of sweets come out of that in the sense that it was terrific to see Sloaney there and actually showing leadership to the young boys. And apparently he was urging them on and making sure that everybody performed up to the mark, etc. And even when they were starting to lag, making sure that those laggers didn't lag. And also to Gibbsy for turning up there as well and to show that his support too for these young boys. And also then just taking it one step further, young Dode stepping up as an individual and stepping up as a player, and the way he expressed himself, and a big sweep to him for that. And I've got to say that it does bode well for the future that he does look like being a future leader in the club. And so out of that one little session, I just think there was some sweets to hand around out there. And, of course, a big sweet to myself for getting the trifecta on the Melbourne Cup and $2,223, $2,226.30. Very nice indeed for my $84. So big sweet to me. And then in terms of smacks, I've got to go off of the football side, I think, a little bit and head towards cricket. And I've got to say, to you batsmen that represent Australia, have you got knackers or have you not got knackers? Have you got some gumption? Have you got any backbone? Have you got any spine? Can you actually leave balls wide of the wicket alone unless you want to put your foot out there to drive them rather than stand there like paralysed rabbits holding the bat out? And I must admit, I have never seen an Australian cricket team that is so weak, so spineless, so gutless. And we talk about ball tampering, letting the country down. These guys are doing, in their own feeble way, a similar disservice to the country. They're actually embarrassing our country. So a great big no, they are, and a big smack to them. You just have to do better than that.
Come on, Macca.
No.
You don't remember how it was back in the bloody grumpy border days?
I remember that, and there was a very good reason for that, because of the fact that we had been stripped of the players that were starring in test matches, and that was because of Packers' ideas and what happened there, without going into all that. But that was because they were the remnants, Fiend, not because they were supposed to be the best. These guys are supposed to be the best, and they are remnants.
But no. Let's not dwell too much. But my impression of how the Aussie team's going at the moment is it's a result of some incestuous selection over the course of like, why is Sean Marsh and Mitch Marsh still getting picked?
Don't get me started on those. Yeah.
And also the level of coaching at state level. Pardon me. It's not good enough. The coaching standard at state level cricket is not good enough. There's too much focus on hit and giggle cricket, and technique is not at the forefront. And I've heard that from a couple of people that should know, and it shows because in international cricket, a opposition team, an opposition fast bowler will find your weakness in a heartbeat. We've seen that time and time again with blokes like Adam Gilchrist and David Warner to some degree. It doesn't matter how good you are, if your technique is not rock solid, opposition teams will find you out. And
I totally agree with you. But these guys at some stage of their cricketing career have been taught technique, and they're abandoning it to play 20-20 type shots, which get them out. They're playing when you're playing that cricket at that level. It is a real dead set dinkum contest, and I think it does. It separates the men from the boys. And at the moment,
are we picking the right blokes, Macca? I don't know whether we are.
No, we're probably not. And to me, I just think it's a case where we're going to have to go sifting through until we get players that have really got the character. And you raised the point about the technique, and you're 100% right about the technique. But these guys have been trained in technique. But they abandon it when they're out there and by playing these reckless shots. And
do they abandon it, or do they implement what they've been taught and get exposed?
Well, we could debate about that all night.
Yeah.
But it certainly isn't. I just think they let the Australian public down. That's what I think.
Well, no, I don't like that. I don't like this whole let the Australian public down, because it's not their it's their responsibility as sportsmen to get the best out of themselves, and we as the Australian public follow the Australian cricket team just like we follow all national teams. But I don't think it smacks of self-entitlement, Macca, to wave your fists at the clouds and going, the Aussie cricket team is letting us down. They're not. They might be letting themselves down as individuals and as a team, but they have no responsibility to the Australian public other than to conduct themselves in a way that does the country proud that they're or does the baggy green proud that they're representing.
As a person who loves cricket and loves watching cricket, I get no joy and no enjoyment out of seeing the spine.
That's your problem. That's your problem. That's not their responsibility, mate.
Sorry to interrupt. Just as we get to 10 o'clock, that's my bedtime, so I will...
well, we should finish up anyway, Pete, so...
Sorry, guys, I do have to bail at 10. So
no, we do understand that you need your beauty sleep and all that.
That's exactly right, mate. You know what it's like.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what it's like, mate. Don't worry about
that. Let's just conclude by saying you have one view and I've got another, and that's mine.
Yep, and it's your segment, so I should shut up. Thanks, Macca.
That was what I was getting at. I didn't want to say it.
No, that's all good. And that's the last time you'll be hearing Macca on CrowCast, so we wish him well in the future.
Pleasure, mate.
All right, everyone. Look, thanks to everyone on the chat for being so interactive as you all always are. Thanks to those who joined us on Facebook. Apologies for the little snafu at the start, but we got there in the end. Don't forget, once again, to support Adam and his family down there at Harvest of Flurio this weekend and all throughout summer. And as he points out in the chat, also go and have a hit at Mount Compass Golf Course too, which is it really is a cracker of a golf course. I love it down there. So, Adam, I might come down and have a hit with you over the next little while. So, we will be back again next week to preview the draft. And hopefully we'll have a little special guest on that will help us preview the draft. But until then, thanks everyone for listening. And
thanks, boys. Good chat
see
tonight.
You later.
Yeah, night all.
See you, boys.